Ethan Cole had been on station Verath 9 for 11 days and had already eaten alone for 11 lunches. That wasn't a complaint. It was just math. The common assembly hall was the kind of place that technically belonged to everyone and practically belonged to no one. Long white tables ran the length of it. The ceiling was high and hummed with recycled air that never quite smelled right. Like someone had tried to clean the idea of oxygen and gotten it mostly correct. Different delegations filled different sections every meal. No one assigned the seating. No one had to. The Yothrok delegates sat near the filtration vents. The Brellian cluster kept to the far left. 3 species whose names Ethan still couldn't pronounce correctly occupied the center tables, and they watched each other the way old neighbors watch each other's property lines. Ethan sat near the door, not because he was being strategic about it, because Dana had the only confirmed briefing that morning and had taken the notes he needed, and if he had to leave fast, he wanted the door closed. His tray had protein blocks, a grain paste that tasted like wet chalk with ambitions, and something green that might have been a vegetable or might have been a suggestion of one. He ate the protein. He read his notes on a flat screen propped against his water cup. He was trying to memorize the correct greeting for the Brellian second console, which had 17 syllables and 1 sound that required a person to briefly stop using their throat. He was on his 4th attempt when he noticed her. She was sitting against the far wall, not at a table, on the floor, knees drawn up, a gray hood pulled low over her face. She wore a transit wrap, the kind given to refugees and displaced persons passing through assembly checkpoints. It was worn at the edges. She had nothing in front of her. Nothing. Ethan looked at his food. He had eaten roughly half of it. The green thing remained a mystery he had decided not to solve. He picked up his tray, walked across the hall, set it down on the floor in front of her, and went back to his seat. He did not say anything. He picked up his screen, found his place in the Brellian greeting, and kept reading. He did not look up again for a few minutes. When he did, he noticed 3 things. The Yothrak delegate near the vent had stopped eating and was touching the small communication device on his wrist. 2 members of the Brellian cluster had shifted their chairs a quarter turn toward the far wall, and the hooded figure had not touched the food. She had lifted her head. The hood was still up, but it had shifted just enough that he could see her jaw. The skin was a flat, matte gray. Along the jawline, faint lines of light ran like cracks in dark stone, bioluminescent markings that he recognized from the alien species index Dana had made him study his first week on the station. Kale. The markings were blazing. He didn't know what that meant. The index had a section on Kale markings, but he hadn't gotten to it yet. She was looking directly at him. He gave her the nod, the small, single-tilt Midwest nod that meant nothing more than, "Yeah, I see you, we're fine, no need to make it a thing." He went back to his notes. He got the Brellian greeting right on the 6th attempt. Around him, the delegation slowly returned to their meals. The Yothrok delegate took his hand off the communication device. The Brellian cluster turned back to their table. The hooded figure looked at the tray for a long time. Then she ate. Ethan finished his water, folded up his screen, and stood to leave. He had a translation review session with Dana in 20 minutes, and she had a policy about punctuality that she enforced with a specific kind of silence that was worse than yelling. He stacked his empty cup on a nearby return shelf and walked toward the door. At the door, he paused. He didn't know why. Some low instinct, maybe, the kind that lives below thought and operates on its own schedule. He looked back. The hooded figure was watching him go. Her markings had gone dark again. All the light in them gone. She was very still. He held the door open, gave her the nod a second time, and left. Dana Calloway had been Ethan's handler for 8 months, and in that time she had developed a reliable internal system for measuring how much trouble he had created on any given day. It ran on a scale she had named quietly in her own head, from 0, which meant nothing happened, to 10, which she imagined but hoped never to see. That afternoon, while Ethan was working on his translation drills, 2 different delegations contacted the Human Outpost's communication desk. She didn't tell Ethan. She sat in her office and read both messages twice. The first was from the Yothrak Attica. It was formal and dry and 3 paragraphs long, and what it said, stripped of all its careful diplomatic language, was, "We saw what your man did at lunch, and we would very much like to know what he knows." The second was shorter. It was from a Brellian cultural liaison. It said, "The gesture your envoy extended in the meal hall today, does he understand its weight in Kale contract law?" Dana set both messages down. She thought about Ethan, who was probably right now in the next room, mispronouncing a Brellian consonant cluster and not being bothered about it. She thought about the hooded figure she hadn't actually seen herself, but was already building a picture of from the fragments in both messages. She thought about the Kale Species Index, specifically the chapter on resource-sharing customs, specifically the subsection on what it meant when a Kale accepted food from a non-kin stranger in a public space. She opened the index. She found the subsection. She read it. She closed the index. She sat very still for a moment, the way a person sits when they are deciding how loud to be about something. Then she picked up her screen and typed a note to herself. It said, "Find out if Ethan knows what Kale jaw markings mean." She added a second line. "Find out which house she belongs to." She added a third line. "Do not tell Ethan any of this yet, because he will look unbothered, and that will make it worse." She saved the note. Through the wall, she heard him finally get the Brellian greeting right. He said it quietly to himself, once, satisfied. She put her head in her hands. Back in the assembly hall, the meal trays sat empty. The hooded figure had eaten everything, including the green thing. She sat with her back to the wall, hood pulled low, and looked at the door where the human had gone. Her markings stayed dark, but her hands, folded in her lap, were perfectly, completely still. For the Kale, stillness was the tell, not the light. The light was a reaction. Corridor Delta 7 was the kind of place that existed because stations needed connective tissue between important spaces, but never got around to making the tissue look nice. The lights ran on a dimming cycle that the maintenance crew had been meaning to fix for about 6 months. The floor panels were a slightly different shade of gray than the walls, which were a slightly different shade of gray than the ceiling, creating the impression of a hallway assembled by someone working from a description of a hallway rather than an actual one. Ethan walked it at a reasonable pace, screen under his arm, thinking about the Brellian second consul's full title and whether he was going to have to say it out loud tomorrow or if he could get away with the short form. He heard footsteps behind him. He moved to the right side of the corridor out of habit, making room. The footsteps matched his pace. He didn't look over. That was what corridors were for. He counted the steps. 4, 7, 11. On the 11th step, he glanced to his left. The gray transit wrap, the hood still up. He looked forward again. She walked beside him without speaking. The corridor was quiet enough that he could hear the soft sound of her footsteps, lighter than his, landing differently, like someone who had grown up on a surface with less gravity than a standard human environment. He counted more steps. She said nothing. On the 17th step, she spoke. "You know what you did," she said. Her galactic standard was clean and precise, the kind that came from learning it academically rather than by living in it. Each word arrived complete and separate. "At lunch," Ethan said. "Yes, I gave you the rest of my food. You did, because you didn't have any." 4 steps. That is what you believe you did, she said. Ethan thought about this. That is definitely what I did, he said. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he stopped and turned around. She reached up with both hands and pulled the hood back. The bioluminescent markings along her jaw were running a slow, complex pattern. Not the full blaze he had seen in the meal hall, but something more controlled, like embers that had decided not to go out. Her eyes were a pale, reflective gold. Her expression was the kind that gave nothing away, not because it was trained to hide things, but because it was waiting. He recognized that kind of waiting. It was the waiting of someone who had asked a real question and was not interested in a comfortable answer. Do you know, she said, what you truly are? Ethan looked at her. He looked at the corridor behind her, then the corridor ahead of him. Currently, he said, lost. I think I missed the right turn about 3 minutes back. Her markings shifted. He couldn't read the pattern. He didn't know enough to read it. But something changed in it. Walk with me, he said. I'll find the turn. I can usually backtrack. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she pulled her hood back up, turned and fell into step beside him again. He had been correct about the 3 minutes. At the junction where his corridor split off from hers, she stopped. He stopped too. Come find me, she said, when the station sleeps. He started to think through what that meant. When a station sleeps, the observation deck, 0300, was the quiet period. She was already walking. He stood at the junction and watched her go until the corridor turned and she was gone. He looked at the ceiling. Well, he said to no one, that's a thing. He went to find Dana. He did not tell her about the corridor. He said the translation session went fine, and he thought he had the Brellian greeting solid. And Dana poured herself something close to coffee and said she would believe that when she heard it. And he went to his bunk and lay on top of the covers in the dark and stared at the ceiling. He thought about her question, not the other one, not the one about what he was, the first one. Do you know what you did? He had given a stranger half his lunch because she had no food. That was what he did. He would have done the same thing on a street corner back home. Except there, it would have been a sandwich, and nobody would have written up an incident report. He closed his eyes. At 02:45, he got up, put his boots back on, and went to the observation deck. She was already there. She had taken the hood down. The observation deck was sealed off from the rest of the station at this hour. A recorded entry, but no active monitoring. He had checked. The view through the deck's wide panel was the kind that made a person feel small in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. Stars scattered in directions that had no names in any language he spoke. A distant gas cloud burned in slow orange and red. She stood at the far edge of the panel, with her arms at her sides and her markings running quiet. He walked over and stood beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. You came, she said. You said to come when the station sleeps. This is when the station sleeps. Most people would not come. Most people don't miss turns in Delta 7. She turned to look at him. The orange light from the gas cloud caught the edge of her jaw markings. I am Viren, she said, of the Kale Dominion. He looked at her. Ethan, he said, of Ohio. Her markings shifted in a way that he thought, but could not be sure, might have been the Kale equivalent of a small smile. I know what I am, he said. I'm a junior envoy who eats alone and mispronounces Brellian consonants. That what you were asking? No, she said. Thought not. The gas cloud burned quietly. Some enormous slow thing was happening out there in the dark, and they were 2 very small figures standing in front of it. Sit down, she said. I have things to tell you. He sat on the deck floor with his back against the panel, legs stretched out. After a moment, she sat beside him. Not close, but beside him. How much do you know, she asked, about how this galaxy works? Enough to be dangerous, Ethan said. Not enough to be useful. That, she said quietly, is more honest than anything I have heard in 4 years of assembly sessions. She looked at the stars. Then let me tell you, she said, what the galaxy is. And the orange light of the gas cloud held them both, and outside in the dark, the universe continued to be enormous, and neither of them moved for a very long time. She started with the Kale, not because it was the most important place to start, but because it was where she knew the truth from the inside, and the truth from the inside was the only kind worth giving. The Kale had been a spacefaring people for 11,000 years. In that time, they had made contact with over 60 sentient species. They had studied every one of them. They had built models, written frameworks, developed entire sciences of behavioral prediction, all built on one central observation. Every species, without exception, extended generosity only when there was a return to be calculated. Food was given to kin. Resources were shared within a group. Cooperation happened when the cost of not cooperating was higher than the cost of cooperating. Even the most seemingly generous acts, when studied long enough, revealed a structure underneath. Reputation benefit, social stability, long-term survival advantage. This was not a cynical view, Viren said. It was simply the shape of all life they had ever encountered. Ethan listened. She paused, looked at him. Are you understanding me? You're saying every species is basically keeping score, Ethan said. Yes. Even when they don't know they are. Especially then. Okay, he said. And then? And then, she said, we encountered humanity. She had been about 12 years old when the first assessment files on humans came back to the Dominion. She hadn't read them then. They were not for children. But she had grown up with the conversation around them. She had heard adults go quiet when the subject came up. She had noticed that the human assessment files were updated more frequently than any other species file in the Dominion's entire archive. Every few years, a new addendum, a new set of behaviors that didn't fit. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. What kind of behaviors? He asked. She looked at the stars for a moment. Your species, she said, gives blood to strangers. Organ donation, yeah. You adopt children that carry no part of your biology. Sure. You run into burning structures to retrieve people you have never met. Firefighters, yeah. You feed animals that provide you no material benefit. He thought about his neighbor's cat, which he had fed every time the neighbor traveled, for 3 years, even though the cat had never once shown appreciation for this, and in fact had bitten him twice. Yeah, he said. You give food, Viren said, to strangers, on the floor of an assembly hall, and then you go back to your reading. He was quiet. The assembly has had an open file on humanity for 60 years. Not because humans are aggressive, not because you are territorial beyond normal bounds, not because your technology presents a military threat. She turned to look at him fully. Because you do not fit the model. Because no behavioral framework the assembly has built in 4,000 years of science can predict what a human will do when presented with another being that needs something. Ethan thought about this. That seems like a good thing, he said. It seems like a very dangerous thing, she said. To who? To every species that has built a civilization on the assumption that resources are protected and generosity has limits. He looked at the gas cloud burning slowly in the distance. What happens, he said, if a species that doesn't have those limits starts to expand? Viren's jaw markings went dark. They rewrite everything, she said. Every treaty built on scarcity logic. Every alliance built on mutual benefit. Every system that assumes beings will protect their own before they protect others. Because we just don't. No. He sat with that for a while. Outside, a small transport vessel crossed the station's outer edge, running lights blinking in slow red. The file, he said. What do they call it? She said a phrase in Kale. Then she translated it herself. The anomaly that does not fit. He looked at her. Bren's committee, he said. Dana mentioned it once, said they were reviewing a classification. Viren was still. Yes. What does a classification mean? She didn't answer right away. The station breathed around them. The low hum of systems running, the distant sound of something in the maintenance levels. In assembly law, she said, a classification authorizes a response. What kind of response? She looked at him. Her markings stayed dark. The kind, she said, that solves a problem by deciding that the problem is manageable. Ethan looked at the floor. He thought about that word for a moment. Manageable. He had heard it in enough meetings to know that it was the word people use when they didn't want to say the word they actually meant. And the meal, he said, that's what set this off. No, she said, the file has been building for 60 years. What you did in the meal hall gave them a single, clear, current example to point to. I gave you half a plate of food. You gave a stranger half your resources with no contract, no calculation, and no audience. And when you were done, you went back to your reading. He rubbed his face. I was not performing, he said. I know, she said. How do you know? She looked at him for a long moment. Because I watched you, she said, for 11 days. I have been on this station in transit wrap for 11 days, and I watched the human delegation. I watched you specifically. And the thing I could not find in 11 days of observation was the calculation. He stared at her. You've been watching me for 11 days. Yes. And you're just telling me this now? Yes. He thought about this. That is a little unsettling, he said. Yes, she said. I imagine it is. Her jaw markings blazed white, suddenly, bright. That, she said quietly, is exactly the problem. You are more concerned about the watching than about the committee. He opened his mouth, closed it. Okay, he said, that's fair. She looked at the stars again. I needed to know if you were real, she said, if the gesture was genuine, if humans truly operate this way, or if it is performance. If your species has learned that the appearance of unconditional generosity is the most powerful form of leverage in a galaxy built on scarcity. And, he said, she was quiet. You are real, she said. That is what terrifies them. She stood. He stood too. I'm going to need some time, he said, to think about all of this. Yes, she said. And you're going to? I have a committee session in 6 hours, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said what was sitting in the air between them. She pulled her hood up. He put his hands in his pockets. Good night, he said. Good night, Ethan of Ohio, she said. She walked out of the observation deck and back into the station's dark corridors. He stood at the panel and watched the gas cloud burn for a while longer. Then he went back to his bunk. This time he did not sleep at all. Dana read the first message at 6:12. She was on her second cup of something close to coffee and had been awake since 500, which was normal for her on Verath 9. The station ran on a cycle, but Dana's sleep had given up on cycles somewhere around month 3, and now simply operated on stress. The message was flagged from the Assembly's administrative routing system. It was addressed to the Human Delegation Outpost, General Correspondence, which meant it had been sent through a channel that technically anyone could access and practically no one monitored. She opened it, she read it. She put it down, picked up her coffee, drank some of it. She picked up the message again and read it a second time, to make sure she had understood it correctly. She had. The message contained a document. The document was 83 pages long. It was titled in Galactic Standard, Formal Classification Proposal, Species Designate, Human. Committee Reference, Bren 7, Status, Pending Final Review. She opened the appendix first, because Dana Calloway had learned in 8 years of diplomatic service that the important things were always in the appendix. The appendix was 4 pages. It outlined a projected timeline. She read all 4 pages. Then she set the screen down very carefully on the desk and stared at the wall for a moment. Then she went to find Ethan. Ethan was in the small common room of the human quarters, eating a breakfast block and reading the same brilliant translation notes he had been working on for 3 days. He looked up when she came in. She sat down across from him without saying anything. She put the screen on the table and slid it toward him. "Read the appendix," she said. "Good morning to you too. Read it." He read it. It took him about 6 minutes. He went back through 2 sections a second time. He set the screen down. He looked at his breakfast block. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Dana repeated. "That's your response. I need a minute. Take 2. He took 2 minutes. He drank some water. He looked out the small porthole that gave onto the station's outer ring, where a cargo loader was moving slowly past, carrying something large and indifferent. "They want to classify us as an existential variable," he said. "Yes, and manage the variable. That is what it says. Because we share food." Dana pressed both hands flat on the table. "Ethan," she said, "it is not because you share food. It is because your food sharing is documented evidence of a 60-year behavioral pattern that the Assembly has concluded is structurally incompatible with how they have built everything. Every treaty, every resource agreement, every alliance, all of it built on the assumption that species protect their own resources and extend help only when there is a clear return. And humans just..." She stopped. "Just what?" he said. "Don't," she said. "You just don't. And they have been watching you not do it for 60 years, and now someone has filed a formal proposal, and Bren's committee is reviewing it, and the Dominion signature could go either way." She picked up her coffee. "Do you understand what I am saying?" "I understand." "The meal, Ethan, I know. She was watching you. You walked over there and gave her half your food in front of 4 delegations, and then you sat back down and read your notes. I didn't know. I know you didn't know. That is the point. That is the entire point." He sat quietly for a moment. "Who sent the document?" he asked. Dana set down her coffee. "It came from a Kale routing address," she said. "Anonymous, but Kale routing." He nodded slowly. In the committee chamber, Councillor Bren was presenting his classification proposal. He did not enjoy this part of his work. He wanted to be clear about that, in his own mind. He did not hate humans. He did not wish them harm in any personal sense. He was a practical person doing a practical job, and the job right now was to explain to 13 senior assembly members why the data pointed in one clear direction. It was the kind that accumulated slowly and became enormous only when you stepped back far enough to see all of it at once. Medical ships that treated enemy combatants. Settlements that absorbed refugee populations at resource cost to themselves. Technology sharing agreements between competing nations with no clear individual advantage. Organ donation, blood banks, anonymous charitable giving across cultures and centuries. A species-wide pattern of extending resources to strangers at measurable personal cost, with no consistent social or biological incentive that the Assembly's models could explain. He advanced to the final slide. "The concern," he said, "is not what humanity does now, with a limited reach. The concern is the trajectory. A species that cooperates at this scale, with this consistency, across this range of individuals and groups, with no clear limit to who they extend that cooperation to." He looked at the committee members. "If this species reaches full assembly participation," he said, "the existing framework for resource management, treaty law, and alliance structure will not survive it. Not because humans will attack it, but because they will simply keep behaving the way they behave, and other species will adapt to them, and the systems built on scarcity logic will become..." He paused. "Obsolete," he said. He was not wrong. He knew he was not wrong. That was the hard thing about the whole situation. Everyone in the room could see that he was not wrong, and everyone in the room could see the problem with being right about it. The door opened, Viren walked in. She wore the gray formal dress of the Kale Dominion's ruling house, with the house markings visible at her collar. Her jaw markings were cool and steady. Every person in the room knew who she was. Nobody had known she was on the station. She walked to the speaking position without being asked. "I will speak," she said. Bren stepped aside. She looked at the committee. "I observed the human envoy for 11 days. I am speaking as a direct witness to the behavior cited as the most recent data point for this classification." She paused. The meal-sharing event was not a performance. It was not calculated. It was not leverage. I spoke with the envoy personally and at length. She looked at Bren. "Counselor Bren is not wrong about the data. I want to say that clearly. The pattern is real. The trajectory is real." Bren nodded carefully. "But a classification that authorizes management action does not solve the problem he is describing. It removes one data point. It does not change the species. And the species, once it reaches full participation in assembly space, will," she said a phrase in Kale. She translated it herself, immediately. "Find another way," she said. "Rivers do not stop being rivers because you reroute them." She looked at the committee for one more moment. Then she turned and walked out. The chamber was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then it was very loud. Ethan never heard any of this directly. Dana read him a summary 3 hours later, standing in the doorway of his room, using the tone of voice she used when something large had happened, and she was still deciding how to feel about it. "She defended you," Dana said. "She defended humanity," Ethan said. "You personally were cited." "I gave her lunch." Dana stood in the doorway. "The second signature," she said. "Bren needs the Dominion to co-sign the classification for it to move to action phase." "Yeah." "Viren is the Dominion's heir." "Yeah." He looked at the wall. Then he got up, went to the commissary, and asked for a travel meal pack, the kind given to passengers in transit, small and simple and enough for a long journey. The commissary staff did not ask him why.
Welcome back to our podcast. Today we're exploring a fascinating narrative set in the hangar bay on Vareth 9, a place that smells like fuel and metal. It's a cold, vast space bustling with activity.
Absolutely. We meet Ethan, who has a meal pack in 38 minutes before a Kale vessel departs. It's intriguing how time and food play such a vital role in his mission.
Right? And then there's Viren, who oversees the loading of the ship. The moment Ethan approaches, you can sense the tension and the importance of their interaction. What do you think made him decide to approach her?
It almost feels like an instinctual act of gratitude. He acknowledges her efforts with a meal pack, which is more than just food. It's a gesture laden with meaning. But Viren challenges him, asking if this is truly a thank you.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how food is used in their culture as a binding act, rather than just a social one. It raises the question, what does it mean to share food in our own cultures?
Great point. In many societies, sharing food symbolizes trust and connection. But here, it seems to carry a deeper significance, especially considering Viren's position in the Kale Dominion.
And speaking of significance, Viren mentions the classification still being on the table. Ethan understands the stakes, but it's clear he's navigating a complex political landscape. What do you think he hopes to achieve by being there?
I think he wants to show support and acknowledgement for her risk-taking on behalf of his species. It's a blend of gratitude and political awareness, which makes their exchange so compelling.
And then there's that powerful moment when Viren says, "You have looked at me and decided I am worth continuing." It's such a profound statement about value and connection.
Absolutely. It encapsulates the essence of their interaction. Ethan's small act of kindness has significant implications in a universe filled with political intricacies.
As the story unfolds, we see the complexity of their world with the looming deadline for the co-signature. It's a reminder of how often we take time for granted, isn't it?
Definitely. The 4-year wait for refiling is staggering. It makes you think about the urgency of actions and the weight of decisions. What do you think drives their urgency?
I believe it's the fear of losing opportunities and the hope of making a change. In our own lives, we often face similar pressures.
In the end, Ethan reflects on the significance of the moment as he watches the Kale ship depart. It's a poignant reminder that every act, no matter how small, can have a long-lasting impact.
And that's the whole thing, isn't it? The interconnectedness of actions and their ripple effects in our lives. What a beautiful narrative.
As we wrap up today's discussion, let's remember how food, time, and connection can shape our experiences and relationships.
And don't forget to join us next time as we dive into another captivating story. Until then, take care.